The next display features several of the people from the 1868 photograph album that we have mentioned that came back to the church in 1932 from the architect, Harry Wild Jones, who designed the interior as we see it today. In 1911, when he came back here from Minneapolis to do that, these are the people who held a reception for him, and together they identified the people in this album. That is how we've been able to tell you who these people are. And thanks to Lois and Norwood Barris, who have transcribed all of the records of Forest Hill Cemetery, we have been able to determine the lifespans for several of these people. The next display features some of the people from the 1868 album for whom we could identify living spaces at some point during the 19th century. In other words, we know where their Fredonia homes probably were. And in some cases, the home site or the home itself would still be there. First is Zatu Cushing, and his home is still there at 171 Eagle Street. Other examples are the Lewis family home, and this is the gentleman who was the first pipe organist that we discussed upstairs. Other examples are Almond Z. Madison's home. He was the gentleman who was the clerk for 40 years in the second half of the 19th century and who had saved so many records. In fact, many of his archives are with the Erie County Historical Society. We talked about Deacon Pettit. His home still exists on Cushing Street. And then there are several others in the Cushing Street and Eagle Street area, including the homes of Anson and Miranda Guild. And these are some other members of the Guild family. One of them, Mrs. John Lenora Guild Lathrop, was the wife of the first choir master here at the Fredonia Baptist Church. Another interesting lady was Carrie Damon Flint, and she is pictured here many decades later with her brother. They shared a home in the early part of the 20th century. This is her picture in 1868. Other people in Fredonia who had homes that still exist, or even several homes that still exist, included John Hamilton Jr. He and his family had several properties in Fredonia. Another couple, and this couple lived on Center Street in a very large, beautiful home, were Dayton Morgan and his wife, Mary Safford. On Canada Way were Albert Colburn and his wife, Lottie Hart. In the DFT Museum, as we know it today, were the Frazine family. And on Center Street, further down, were Arnold Kingsbury. And another house was owned by Mary Draper. And all of these people, because they were close friends of the Pettit family, could have easily, because they were also abolitionists, been supporters in one way or another for the Underground Railroad. That doesn't mean that their house had tunnels or hidden attics. It might mean that they provided other things, maybe brief shelter, maybe clothing, maybe food, maybe financial assistance. But they probably did help. Another family was on Forest Place, the McElwee family, and here are two of the daughters. Another family, the parents, were on this beautiful home on Temple Street, one of the many homes that have been restored in this area by George Mallory and his wife. Sometimes the home no longer exists. An example is the home of the Tate family. This was a large home at the very end of Cushing Street. And this map shows Fredonia in 1851, about a decade before the Civil War. The original of this map is on file at the Barker Museum. This display corresponds to the memorial plaque for Mrs. Esther McNeil. There's a corresponding plaque upstairs in the sanctuary, and it commemorates the founding of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. In the early 1870s, many of the women of the Fredonia Baptist Church joined with women from the other churches in the area to protest the sale of alcohol in Fredonia. Although the church had at one time been very tolerant of alcohol and indeed served wine in communion, the prevalence of alcohol in the area had rendered several women and children quite destitute because their fathers were no longer with them. This angered several of the women, many of whom were most likely involved in the suffrage movement as well, and this was their way of speaking out.